Hey guys, I just finished watching The Last of Us, the last episode of The Last of Us with my dad. And I thought it'd be cool to ask him some questions, since this is the first time he's experiencing the story. He never played the games. Dad, after watching the last episode, how would you describe the finale in one word?
I guess the first word is unfulfilled, and that still doesn't seem right because the way it ended, it quenches my thirst or desire to continue to see what transpires in the next season.
A great adaptation enhances the core elements of the source material and translates them into its medium for wider audiences to enjoy, all while staying faithful to the original. That's exactly what The Last of Us TV show sets out to do. It adapts the incredibly emotional story told in the critically acclaimed game of the same name. A story that's been enjoyed by millions of gamers on their PlayStation 3s, PlayStation 4s, and, if they can afford it, PlayStation 5s. And now, people who've only had Xboxes, PCs, Nintendos, HBO Max is on Switch, or people who've never picked up a controller in their lives can see what all the fuss is about. The Last of Us means so much to me. It's one of my favorite games of all time, one of the first games that made me cry. It's just such an amazingly told story, and even though its main themes are meant for parents, I often think of my own while playing this game, and the fact that my dad can now experience a story that has impacted me so greatly means a lot. Because the game was really all about love, which is something I've never experienced to this degree in a game before. And this show did a beautiful job adapting the game's theme of love. For the most part.
Alright. What's your experience with gaming? Like, how many games have you played? Are you a gamer?
Well, my experience with gaming is absolutely zero. No experience whatsoever.
I'm pretty good at Pac-Man. I think I've seen you play Pac-Man, right?
Well, I got pretty stoked when I received that first Pac-Man video for Christmas, the little miniature.
The arcade. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, that's probably the closest I've ever come to gaming.
The Last of Us is a post-apocalyptic survival action stealth game that tells the story of Joel Miller, a man whose world ended before the apocalypse. An epidemic caused by an evolved fungus known as the cordyceps starts to infect humans, turning them into these zombie-like monsters. And on Outbreak Day, Joel's daughter Sarah gets killed while the military attempts to keep this fungus from spreading. Cut to 20 years later, and a hardened, emotionless Joel becomes a black market smuggler who's tasked to take a little girl named Ellie, who happens to be immune to the cordyceps virus, across this filthy, diseased country we call America, in order to make a cure. Their relationship starts off rocky at first due to Joel not wanting to fill that hole from Sarah's death and Ellie having a traumatic past of her own, but through a bunch of tribulations and trials, they grow to rely on each other and form a father-daughter bond. When they finally reach their destination, Joel is told that in order to make a cure for the fungal virus, they have to dig into Ellie's brain, effectively killing her. So Joel saves her and lies to Ellie about it. Now, what I just did was adapt a story from a 10 to 12 hour long game into a low quality minute long segment of a YouTube video. The showrunners, Craig Martin and Neil Druckmann, had to adapt what I just said into a 9-episode season of television, which, contrary to popular belief, is easier said than done. The Last of Us is considered a narrative based game that focuses on story and characters just as much, or in some cases more, than gameplay. But there's still interactive elements in the game which had to be addressed and altered by the showrunners. And comparing the TV show to the game, it's very apparent how much game is in this game. Oh shoot, there's a sniper.
You crying behind that car? You crying behind that car?
God, this dude won't shut up. There's more guys up I don't have time for this. Oh my god, please die. Please die. Oh my god.
And then I'm like, I'm gonna ask you a million more times. And he's like, what?
Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Come here. Come on, you butterfly. Yeah.
Please don't do it. Please.
Because most of the story in The Last of Us had gameplay in mind, certain story elements had to be changed for the TV show adaptation, including the main theme of the story. The main theme in the game was love in a loveless world. From the opening of the game, love is shown to be a luxury in this world. Throughout Joel and Ellie's adventure, both through cutscenes and gameplay, they see people who've loved each other to the detriment of their survival. Yet despite love failing for others, Joel and Ellie's love prevailed in this world, to the destruction of it by the end of the game. Joel's decision at the end pretty much redefines the nature of Joel's love for Ellie. His love isn't just a beautiful statement about how he's grown to let someone new fill the hole Sarah left, but an ugly force of nature that maintains the status quo of this loveless world. Joel's decision had such a profound impact on the Last of Us story that one of its adaptation's themes is entirely centered around it. Instead of the main theme being love in a loveless world, the show's main theme is how love makes us do terrible things.
What are your thoughts on Joel and Ellie?
Well, I see them as individuals just trying to find their way. I see them as people who are not perfect. In particular, Joel. He's definitely not a perfect person, and that's kind of what I like about it. Is he makes mistakes in dealing with his children, with Sarah, as well as with Ellie. Myself as a parent, I have to find my way to raise my child up to survive and to live in this world.
TV Joel and Game Joel go through very similar story beats. One could say that they go through the same story beats, since it's the same story. But to emphasize this theme of how love makes us do terrible things, the TV show adaptation has to emphasize certain things about Joel's character that the game only hinted at. How we meet Joel in the game is very similar to how we meet him in the show, from Sarah's perspective. Joel is shown being a loving father to Sarah, and a little more easygoing pre-Sarah's death, but he's always had a dark side. In the early stages of the outbreak, while finding a way to leave the city with Sarah and his brother Tommy, he leaves a scared family stranded despite having room to put them in their truck. It was a survival instinct, one to keep Sarah safe. But when she dies, part of him dies with her, and he lives aimlessly during a 20-year gap before meeting Ellie. However, Joel is still hardened and closed off for the majority of the story, even after meeting Ellie. For the TV adaptation, Joel is slightly more vulnerable. A recurring element of TV Joel's character is failure. In the opening half of the first episode, we see that Joel has a very small world. It only has a family in it, Sarah and Tommy, and he has no interest in letting anyone else in. Being the protector of his world is Joel's purpose, so when Sarah dies, he feels like he failed her. His trauma throughout the series doesn't just derive from the death of his daughter, but his failure to be a father and a protector. That's why when we see him 20 years later, his main motivation is to save Tommy, not just to guide more weapons like it is in the game, because he wants to be a protector again. Joel's failure also foreshadows his decision in the last episode. At the end of the first episode, Joel instinctively protects Ellie from the Federal soldier after getting a flashback to his daughter dying. While he didn't fail Ellie here, he does experience failure throughout their journey. He fails to save Tess. He fails to protect himself from a random raider only to be saved by Ellie. He failed to protect Henry and Sam. He failed to protect Ellie from the harshness of this world. These events already happened in the game, but when they're recontextualized as Joel's failures, it acts more as a justification to save Ellie from saving the world. But let's talk about Ellie for a second. Not much has changed about her from the game either. Both versions are really cool, smart, and capable kids that support Joel through their journey. The show emphasizes Ellie's innocence to this world, with her being curious about guns and violence, and her innocence slowly deteriorating throughout the story. How her innocence ties into the theme of love making us do terrible things is she's often the target of said terrible things. From the moment she's born, Ellie's mom lies about a newborn Ellie potentially being infected in order to keep her alive. Ellie gets in trouble at the Fedra school after she beats up a Fedra bully and is sent to the Fedra principal office, where the Fedra principal pushes Ellie to use her Fedra intelligence to lead to a bright, beautiful future for her. But in reality, it's just to ensure that Fedra has a bright Fedra future. Fedra. Later in the story, David, the leader of a cannibalistic group of survivors, forces his ideals of love on her and is just an evil guy. Actually, David's love is on the opposite spectrum of Joel's love if you think about it. Like Joel, David is a protector of his world, only he's interested in making it bigger. Like the cordyceps is how he puts it. And he sees Ellie as an equal, not necessarily a daughter like Joel. Obviously, the way David expresses his love is toxic and abusive. And also he's a pedophile, so that's not good. But Joel's love, while not evil like David, isn't great either because it's by his own definition. not Ellie's. Joel and Ellie's relationship is the highlight of both the game and the show. I like how the show shows how they respect each other in the beginning, but Ellie's too stubborn to acknowledge it, and Joel's too afraid to open his heart to failure again. I think the show adapts Joel and Ellie well to its new theme, but the journey they go on, not so much. I mean, okay, it's not bad by any means, but like, we'll get there. The show follows the game's narrative pretty closely, only deviating slightly to emphasize the new theme or to expand on the world in ways the game couldn't. Episode 3, Long Time, is infamous for having the biggest deviation from the game. In case you weren't aware, in the game, Joel and Ellie actually meet Bill on their journey to gather supplies. They go on an adventure with him, fight a bunch of infected along the way, and oh, wow, a bloater. That would have been cool to see more of in the show. Anyway, they fight a bunch of infected and miss opportunity until they finally come across Frank, or Frank's dead body. If we search around the house, they find his body and will eventually find Frank's suicide note that implies that him and Bill did have a relationship, and it didn't end well. Because this section is gameplay heavy and they probably blew their budget on the bloater we see in episode 5, the showrunners decided to change Joel and Ellie's encounter with Bill to a flashback of one of the most well-told love stories I've ever seen. Bill, like in the game, starts off as this doomsday prepping, Second Amendment loving, borderline schizophrenic badass that only cares about surviving and protecting himself. Until he met Frank, a whimsical aesthete, look it up, who somehow stumbled into Bill's life. It's a classic love story about two opposites attracting while making each other better people. And its role in the overall narrative serves the same purpose as the game. Joel and Ellie go on a hike to get supplies, they finish the hike and get said supplies, and learn a thing or two relating to the overall theme of the story. The theme for the game being love in a loveless world is fulfilled because Frank's departure from Bill shows how Bill thinks love makes you weak. And the TV show's theme of love making us do terrible things motivates Joel to protect Ellie after seeing Bill successfully protect Frank. If I'm being honest with myself, I prefer the game's theme over the show's. One of The Last of Us's biggest strengths is the simplicity of its story. It's a typical save the world plot with the execution of a small indie film, but the world they're trying to save has a beautiful contrast to Joel and Ellie's emotional journey. Their growing love for each other is made even more special when seeing others try to maintain some love for each other and fail due to the nature of the world. And the world's cruel nature is told very well, not only through its narrative, but through gameplay. But in a TV show adaptation where the nuance of that interactivity is gone, the violence and cruelty of a world like this probably won't have the same effect when you're only watching it. So I understand when I gave Bill and Frank's story a happier ending and how it reinforces the show's theme of how love makes you do bad things. It felt natural and organic to the overall feel of The Last of Us, which is why I didn't like Kathleen's character. Watching the show while it was airing, Kathleen was the only thing I didn't like. I felt like her character was only put in the show to emphasize the show's theme without being, subtle about it. I mean, she literally laid out the fact that she's doing a bad thing for someone she loved, and that's a parallel to how Joel does it in the show, guys. You see how they're clever because it parallels. Look at that, wow. And I got what the showrunners were trying to do. They wanted to humanize the villains in ways they couldn't in the original game, but I thought they were already, humanized enough. I'm not saying I cared about every enemy I killed, or at least not in the way that part 2 does, but it is heavily implied that these enemy groups are only our enemies to protect each other. I feel like, that should be enough motivation for the bad guys in the show, and the time dedicated to fleshing them out could have been given to Henry and Sam, who've been adapted in such a genius way in this show. I mean, Sam being deaf so he can rely more of his brother in this dangerous world. Sam being younger so Ellie has someone who can look up to her. Henry being a little more ill-experienced so he has to rely more on Joel. There's so much potential for a great story told with these two characters, and they threw it away so they could focus on the bad guys. I get why we have to care about both parties somewhat, but why make a change that so obviously ties to the ending of the story? That's at least what I thought when I first watched this show. When I binge watched all the episodes again to work on this video, I realized that Kathleen's story not only foreshadows the show's ending, but it thematically parallels Henry and Sam's story. In the adaptation, Henry, to get a cure for Sam's illness, kills the leader of the resistance against this city's Fedra, who also happened to be Kathleen's older brother. An older brother who, like Henry, had to be a parental figure for his younger sibling. In episode 4, aka Kathleen's debut episode, they're tracking Henry and Sam, and when they find their abandoned hideout, Kathleen says this.
They're out of food. Henry won't let Sam starve. Double the guards around our provisions. He's close.
She's not saying this because she knows Sam that well, but because she knows her brother would have done the same thing. Kathleen's vengeance is disguised as justice, but her justice is disguised as jealousy. Why does she have to lose her brother in order for Henry to keep his? It's not fair, and she's gonna make sure they know it. At the end of the day, I still would have preferred them focusing more on Sam and Henry, but in a way, Kathleen's jealousy of Sam and Henry's love inadvertently tells us more about the characters.
Do you like golf?
Never played golf. So
Oh,
I don't
okay.
really.
I got you. You're gonna hate golf.
Part of me, the cynical a-hole part, isn't surprised by how The Last of Us TV show has been received. It's yet another adaptation of a critically acclaimed game coming out when video games and video game adaptations are starting to become more mainstream. Of course, this show would do well. All they had to do was stay close to the original story and critics and audiences would love it. But the thing that this show does, and why I think it's so great, is it goes that extra mile. They tweak the story and its characters to better suit TV, and their new theme of how love makes us do terrible things enhances The Last of Us's incredible ending. And I know there are people more cynical than me that didn't like the changes to the original story, but you can at least appreciate its other aspects. The set designs are amazing, like they're pretty much ripped out of the original game, and the attention to detail to the visual effects, both practical and digital, are outmatched. I can't wait to see what they can do with a bigger budget for season 2. The cinematography is it's okay. I mean, it's pretty standard. But overall, it's obvious that a lot of love went to this adaptation, and a lot of attention to detail went to doing this amazing game justice, both visually and narratively. But there is not a single brick or bottle thrown in the entire show. So I gotta give the show a 0 out of 10, guys. Come on. You had one job, Neil. It was so easy. Just get him to throw a brick or bottle. How hard is that to do? That's a core mechanic of the game.
Love will abide. Take things in stride.
And you're telling me to say
Sounds
like,
good advice.
comment, and subscribe.
Yes.
So that's what I just did.
Yeah.